In 1932, a Belgian physiologist named Jean La Barre coined a word for something he could not yet prove existed. He called it an incretin, a signal, released by the gut after a meal, that traveled to the pancreas and told it to release insulin. His evidence was indirect but striking. Give a person glucose by mouth and their insulin surges. Give them the exact same amount of glucose straight into a vein, bypassing the gut entirely, and the insulin response is much smaller. Something in the digestive tract itself had to be adding an extra push. Nobody could isolate that something. The idea sat there, unproven, for 4 decades. The first real incretin hormone was finally isolated in the early 1970s. Researchers including John Brown and Ray Pedersen identified GIP, and La Barre's old theory suddenly had a molecule behind it. But GIP alone did not fully explain the gut's effect on insulin, especially in people with type 2 diabetes, where GIP's power seemed blunted. There had to be a second signal. The search for it took an unexpected turn through gene sequencing rather than hormone purification. In 1983, teams led by Graeme and Joel Habener cloned the proglucag gene, the gene responsible for making glucagon, and found it encoded more than glucagon alone. Buried in the same gene were extra segments nobody had explained yet, one of which looked like a cousin of glucagon itself. They named it glucagon-like peptide 1, GLP-1. Finding the gene sequence was one thing. Proving the molecule actually did anything in the body was another matter entirely. A biochemist named Svetlana Mojsov, working in Habener's lab at Massachusetts General Hospital, purified the specific active fragment of the hormone, a piece called GLP-1. By 1987, Habener's group, including a young researcher named Daniel Dru, and independently, Jens Juel Holst's laboratory in Denmark, both demonstrated that this fragment powerfully stimulated insulin release from the pancreas. In 1993, a German investigator named Michael Nock pushed the proof further, infusing GLP-1 directly into people with type 2 diabetes and watching their blood sugar come down toward normal in real time. The hormone worked, and it worked well. There was just one enormous problem standing between this discovery and an actual medicine. Injected into the bloodstream, native GLP-1 was destroyed by an enzyme called DPP-4 in about 2 minutes. A therapy that vanishes before it can act twice is not a therapy. The fix came from the strangest possible source. In 1992, a researcher named John Eng, working at a Veterans Affairs Medical Center in New York, was studying animal venoms when he found a peptide in the saliva of the Gila monster, a venomous lizard native to the American Southwest. He called it Exenatide 4. It activated the very same receptor as human GLP-1, but it was missing the one amino acid that made the human hormones so fragile, which meant it was naturally resistant to DPP-4 and lasted far longer in the body. Amylin Pharmaceuticals licensed the molecule, developed a synthetic version called Exenatide, and in 2005, the FDA approved it under the brand name Byetta. It was the first GLP-1 receptor agonist drug ever brought to market, arriving more than 2 decades after the hormone itself had first been identified in a gene sequence.
This is Conference Hype. Stay with us, coverage continues.
Exenatide proved the entire drug class could work, but it required injections twice a day, a real burden for patients. A scientist at Novo Nordisk, named Lotte Knudsen, took a different approach from copying a lizard. Her team engineered human GLP-1 itself to survive longer, attaching a fatty acid side chain that let the molecule bind to albumin in the bloodstream, shielding it from the enzyme that had destroyed every earlier attempt. The result was liraglutide, with a half-life stretched to 12 to 15 hours, approved for diabetes in 2010, and for obesity under the name Saxenda in 2014. Knudsen's team then pushed the chemistry even further, swapping one more amino acid and attaching a longer fatty diacid chain. The half-life jumped to roughly 165 hours, long enough for a single injection to last a full week. That molecule was semaglutide, approved for diabetes in 2017 as Ozempic, and for obesity in 2021 as Wegovy. It did not simply change clinical practice. It became a genuine cultural phenomenon, a household name attached to a class of medicine that had spent 90 years as an obscure physiological theory. Semaglutide set an extraordinarily high bar, and Eli Lilly's answer was to stop relying on GLP-1 alone. Peptide chemist Richard March, working with Matthias T. Scherp, pioneered what they called a unimolecular approach: engineer a single peptide capable of activating two different hormone receptors simultaneously, GIP and GLP-1 together, rather than just one. That molecule became tirzepatide, approved for diabetes as Mounjaro in 2022 and for obesity as Zepbound in 2023. In head-to-head trials, it outperformed semaglutide on weight loss, and the field drew an obvious lesson from it: activating more than one gut hormone receptor at once could do more than simply add the effects together. If two receptors beat one, the next step was almost inevitable. Eli Lilly built a molecule that activates three receptors at once: GIP, GLP-1, and glucagon. The glucagon component adds an energy expenditure effect layered on top of appetite suppression. This triple agonist is called Retatrutide, and when its phase 2 results were published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2023, led by Yale endocrinologist Ania Jastreboff, patients on the highest dose lost roughly a quarter of their body weight in under a year. That result set up an obvious question: could a molecule that dramatic hold up in a much larger, longer, phase 3 trial? Answering that question was the entire purpose of the TRIUMPH clinical trial program. On June 6, 2026, at the American Diabetes Association's Scientific Sessions in New Orleans, Ania Jastreboff presented the answer. That is the story of how GLP-1 medicines evolved from a 1930s hormone theory to Retatrutide's 2026 Triumph-1 trial. Add your perspective in the comments, share this story with a colleague, and subscribe for the next Conference Hype narrative.